In the midday heat of a desert highway stretching across the arid Arizona plains, the small town of Riverside lay a forgotten corner where time seemed to have stopped at the turn of the last century. It was here, among the dusty streets and faded advertising signs, that fate brought together several lives that would intertwine in a whirlwind of dramatic events that would upend the notion of good and evil. Keanu Reeves, known for his enigma and silent charisma, who recently settled in Riverside, did not choose this city by chance. He was looking for a refuge from the noise of big cities, from the bustle and constant pressure of society, wanting to regain his lost sense of peace and harmony. His new home, an old barn, converted into a cozy residence, was located on the edge of the city, where the desert landscape met the endless expanses of the sky. Together with him in this quiet corner, his faithful companion, a large dog named Gray, who he rescued from a shelter before moving, settled. Gray was not just a dog. He was a symbol of loyalty, tenderness, and inner strength, reflecting the character of the owner. Mornings in Riverside began the same way as always. The first rays of the sun glided along the streets, awakening sleeping residents and filling the city with hope for a new day. However, this time the atmosphere was filled with a sense of foreboding. Keanu, driving his vintage car, a shiny black convertible with smooth design lines, was heading to the local gas station, which served not only as a place to refill fuel, but also as a kind of social center for locals and travelers. The gas station was located on the edge of town, where the highway suddenly ended in a dense but deserted landscape, creating a sense of transition to another world. Upon arriving, Keanu immediately noticed something odd. The gas station seemed to be marred by multiple signs of recent unrest: dirty tire tracks, scattered packages, and even some faded graffiti on the walls of the building. But what caught his attention most was a group of people gathered near a small corner of the parking lot. Among them, a biker gang known locally as the Steel Crows stood out. These people, tough, hardened by life on the road, accustomed to cruelty and ruthless freedom, always looking for a reason for confrontation and fun at the expense of random passersby. There was one among them who stood out even in this company, a large man with a hard look, decorated with numerous tattoos. Each one seemed to tell its own bloody story. His presence inspired fear, and from his gait alone it was clear that he was accustomed not only to violence, but also to the fact that his actions would not go unpunished. While the other bikers chatted loudly, laughing and teasing each other, this man suddenly, with a sharp movement of his foot, pushed away a small animal, which, as it turned out, was a defenseless dog wandering near the gas station. Keanu slowed down, noticing what was happening, intuitively sensing that something was wrong. His heart began to beat faster when his gaze met the same frightened gaze of the small dog, who was trying to hide in the shadow of the giant trunk. A voice inside him told him that there was something more behind this incident, not just cruelty for fun, but a sign of a coming storm in which even the coldest souls would not be able to stand in the face of cruelty and injustice. Without much time to think, Keanu stepped out of the car, his footsteps echoing across the concrete platform of the gas station. Gray, always nearby and warily watching his master's every move, growled a low but menacing growl. Keanu's gaze was hard and focused, as if he clearly understood that in this small corner of the world, injustice could not be tolerated, and violence was not the answer to any provocation. Amidst the noisy shouts and jeers of the bikers, his calm, almost silent voice suddenly cut through the tense atmosphere. "There is no place for violence here." The words, filled with strength and determination, ran through the crowd, causing even the most desperate to freeze for a moment. Bikers, accustomed to the fact that their aggressive behavior does not cause any consequences, for the first time felt their confidence begin to crumble under the onslaught of unshakable calm and dignity emanating from Keanu. The moment the gang leader stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation, time seemed to slow down. Every sound, from the sharp screech of tires to the quiet rustle of the wind, sounded like a harbinger of imminent retribution. Keanu, maintaining a clear mind, approached the crowd, his gaze never leaving the face of the main aggressor, nor the face of the frightened dog, who seemed to be already seeking shelter in the shadow of the gas station equipment. In this spectacular clash of characters, where every detail mattered, his presence became a symbol of an unshakable principle that did not tolerate the humiliation of any creature. The days in Riverside were filled with a quiet, almost meditative routine, but it was moments like these that reminded people that in the heart of every city there was the potential for great change. Keanu understood that to save those who could not protect themselves, one had to be prepared to fight, even if it began with a single step in a dusty parking lot. His intuition, tempered by years of experience and trials, told him that something more was brewing in this city than just a random altercation between bikers. This was the harbinger of a new era, where everyone could find the strength to defend justice and mercy. While the bikers were talking among themselves, trying to justify their actions, Keanu had already taken the first step to restore the balance. His quiet but confident words penetrated the hearts of those who witnessed what was happening, causing them to feel the need for change. With each word he spoke, the crowd seemed to retreat, giving way to an unwavering determination of kindness. A spark gleamed in his eyes that promised that this fight was not just an incident, but the beginning of a long journey of redemption for all who had witnessed cruelty and indifference. The sun, slowly sinking towards the horizon, began to paint the sky in crimson and gold shades, creating an atmosphere full of contrasts, light and shadow, kindness and cruelty, peace and storm. In this magical moment, when time seemed to stand still, Keanu turned to the crowd and, with a gentle but decisive gesture, invited everyone to join in a conversation about what it means to be a man ready to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. His voice began to echo across the deserted expanses, carried over the highway, forcing even the most hardened aggressors to doubt the correctness of their path. That first meeting was the starting point for events that would change the lives of many Riverside residents. It was here, on the border between the desert and the city, in the heat of conflict and under the sounds of the rushing wind, that the spark of change was born. Keanu Reeves, with his genuine sense of justice and determination, became a symbol of hope for those who had long forgotten what mercy and compassion were. And Gray, his faithful dog, reminded that even in the darkest moments of life, you can find light if you are not afraid to look into its eyes. And so, as the sunset faded and shadows began to fall, a new chapter of Riverside's life began, a life where cruelty gave way to humanity, and a lone voice could be the beginning of a great uprising for justice. And although there were still many trials to overcome, one could already sense that change was inevitable, and that goodness, no matter how quiet it seemed, would always find a way to break through the thickest dark clouds. After the events of the first evening, when the soft sunset gave way to a cold night, life in the town of Riverside began to boil with new colors. Leaving behind the shadows of the previous day, Keanu Reeves felt his heart fill with determination and a desire for change. The night brought not only a coolness, but also a sense of the unknown. New challenges awaited him ahead, and the meeting with the Steel Crows gang turned out to be only the beginning of a long and winding path leading to the transformation of a small town. The morning began early, with the first rays of sunlight filtering through the curtains of the old barn where Keanu lived. The sound of birds and the gentle murmur of water in a nearby stream seemed like a quiet hymn of hope, but inside his soul there was no room for illusions. He had to understand the reasons that led to the incident yesterday and determine which way to move forward. Keanu understood that this conflict with the bikers could not be ignored, because it was situations like these that reveal the essence of society, its weaknesses and potential for generosity. Keanu decided to start the day by exploring the city. He headed to a local cafe known for its cozy atmosphere and genuine American charm. Here, amid the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the sounds of soft jazz music, locals gathered to discuss the news and share their experiences. Despite the ordinary appearance of the establishment, inside it was bustling with life. Talk of the upcoming elections, rumors of upcoming changes in the city council, gossip about long-forgotten stories, and even rumors that something strange was happening in Riverside. It was here that Keanu decided to ask questions to better understand how deep the roots of the violence that erupted at the gas station last night were. Approaching the table where a group of locals were gathering, he sat down next to them with a slight smile. His calm and confident gaze immediately attracted attention. People listened to him silently, as if expecting wise advice from this man or at least a sign that changes were already on the doorstep. One of the interlocutors turned out to be Mr. Henderson, an old-timer of the town, a man who had lived in Riverside all his life and knew every secret of it. He told them that in recent months, changes had been observed in the town. Discontent among young people was growing. Talk of the fight for justice was increasingly common. and even the calmest residents were beginning to wonder how much longer it was possible to peacefully exist in an atmosphere of lawlessness, where even trivial trifles could escalate into conflict. Mr. Henderson recalled with dismay how the city had once been filled with laughter and joy in his youth, with local festivals and celebrations drawing crowds and the streets bustling with life. But much had changed since then. Economic hardship, the departure of large businesses, and the slow but steady transformation of the urban environment had left many with little faith in justice or hope for a better future. Groups once formed to defend the interests of residents now became arenas for aggressive encounters and outbreaks of violence, where weakness became a target and honesty became a laughingstock. Keanu listened attentively, genuinely empathizing with the stories and seeing in every word a call for change. He understood that change is not just words, but a necessity that requires action. So, during this conversation in the cafe, an idea came to him. It is possible to create some kind of initiative that unites people ready to resist lawlessness and violence, where everyone can make their contribution to restoring justice and mutual respect in Riverside. He began to imagine how, together with local leaders, public figures, and, perhaps, even with some of the representatives of those very steel crows, it is possible to organize a dialogue and try to find a way out of the vicious circle of aggression. After the meeting at the cafe, Keanu decided to return to his barn, where his faithful dog Gray was waiting for him. At the threshold of the house, he was met by an old but solid wooden veranda, where an atmosphere of calm and comfort always reigned. Keanu sat down on an antique chair, thoughtfully looking at the horizon, where the blue sky met the endless desert expanses. The idea of a new beginning was spinning in his thoughts, a meeting at which representatives of different social strata could share their experiences, express their expectations, and, most importantly, find a common language. After all, in his opinion, the true American spirit was in the unification of people who, despite their differences, knew how to find solutions to complex problems together. Within an hour, news of the meeting had spread across the city. An announcement appeared on city billboards, in local newspapers, and even on the radio, an invitation to a day of change where anyone could come, express their point of view, and perhaps lay the foundation for a new social movement. At this time, a small but friendly group of activists had already gathered, who, inspired by Keanu's idea, began to prepare for the event. The meeting was planned for the central square of Riverside, a place that was once the heart of the city, but over the years had lost its former glory. Keanu was heavily involved in the preparations, speaking to local businesses, charities, and even those previously associated with gangster structures. His approach was simple and straightforward. He did not try to suppress or condemn, but sincerely invited people to unite for a common goal, to restore the city's former soul and to show that even in the darkest corners it is possible to light a light of hope. We must fight together for justice, because this is the only way to overcome differences and regain a sense of community, he said during informal conversations that literally arose on every corner. The day of change arrived and the central square filled with people, from elderly residents who remembered the times when Riverside was an oasis of joy, to young activists full of ambition and faith in a better future. On a stage improvised from old wooden boxes and furniture, Keanu addressed the assembled audience. His words, filled with passion, wisdom, and undeniable determination, sounded like a call to action, inspiring everyone present. He spoke about how violence cannot be the answer to problems, that the true strength of a people lies in unity and mutual assistance, and change begins with each of us. We are the voice of those who do not want to put up with injustice anymore, he said, and his voice echoed in the hearts of people. During his speech, images of past conflicts emerged, but Keanu was able to translate them into the future, showing that every conflict is a chance for growth, for the understanding that even the darkest moments can become the starting point for a new, bright era. His call for peace and unity resonated even with those who previously considered themselves to be supporters of violence. People who came to the meeting gradually began to realize that division and hostility are not the path to prosperity, but only a way to increase disunity in society. Every word he said, every movement, every gesture created an atmosphere of trust and mutual understanding. But not everything went smoothly. In the shadows of the square, away from the general joy and discussion, several people tried to undermine the atmosphere of the meeting. Among them were former members of the Steel Crows gang, not ready to accept the changes and the loss of their influence in the city. They secretly talked, whispered, and planned how to bring fear and chaos again, to return the power of violence. Keanu, always keenly observing every move, noticed not only the aggressive behavior of some, but also the hidden uncertainty in the eyes of those who sought to return to the past. This only strengthened his conviction in the need for strict dialogue and open confrontation with anything that threatened peace and stability. Over the next few hours, tensions gradually eased, giving way to meaningful conversations and compromises. Community leaders, local officials, and even former adversaries found common ground, realizing that they were united by a common future, not past differences. Keanu, the symbol of this new era, not only spoke of change, but became its personification, a man who could hear the voices of everyone who aspired to be better and channel those voices into constructive dialogue. Night fell over the city, marking the end of Change Day. The central square, still filled with the echo of conversations and quiet applause for a while, gradually emptied, leaving behind a sense of hope and renewed unity. Keanu Reeves stood on the deserted street, watching the starry sky, thinking about how thin the line was between chaos and order, between violence and peace. He knew that there were still many trials ahead, and that those who had once chosen the path of kindness would be forced to fight again to maintain that choice. A few days after Change Day, Riverside began to see changes that were visible to the naked eye. New signs appeared on the streets, slogans for peace, images of joined hands, symbols of mutual aid. Even the old banners that once called for division were gradually replaced by images of community and unity. Keanu, like a silent conductor, watched this process, understanding that change does not happen overnight, but it is inevitable if each of us is ready to bring our share of light into this world. With each passing day, there was a growing sense that Riverside was awakening from a long slumber, that its inhabitants were beginning to rediscover the values lost in the chaos of everyday life. However, the shadow of the past did not give complete rest. Some of the former aggressors, led by representatives of the Steel Crows, were still making plans to return to the old ways, hoping that fear and violence could once again establish control over the city. But it was this conflict, so vital and painful, that became a lesson for Keanu. Sometimes it is in the deepest crises that the brightest stars are born, capable of lighting the way to a new future. And so the struggle for the soul of Riverside continued, a struggle in which every person became a participant in a great drama, where destinies intertwined, and every meeting, every conversation became bricks in the foundation of a new society. Keanu Reeves, no longer just a man, but a symbol of change, looked confidently to the future, knowing that only through open dialogue and a willingness to listen to others can fear and hatred be overcome. His gaze, directed at the endless expanses, was filled with determination. No evil force can extinguish the light that is born in the hearts of people if they decide to go together to a better tomorrow. That night, when the city was already beginning to fall into a quiet sleep, Keanu remained on one of the streets, thinking about how important it is not to lose faith in people and the possibility of change. The city seemed to come alive in his imagination. He saw how old buildings were filled with new stories, how people began to see each other not as enemies, but as comrades in the fight for justice. This quiet, almost intimate moment of awareness became for him a starting point for further action, for the preparation of a new initiative that was supposed to unite not only Riverside, but all the surrounding settlements. With each new dawn, there was a sense of hope in Riverside, as if nature itself was supporting the people's desire for renewal. Keanu knew that many trials lay ahead, but in his heart there was already an unquenchable spark, a spark capable of igniting the flame of change in the darkest corners of the human soul. And even if darkness still lurked in the eyes of some, the light breaking through the cracks in the walls of delusion promised that each new encounter, each new day would be a step toward a world where respect and kindness would become the main laws of life. And so a new story was born in Riverside, a story in which every little thing, every gesture, every word had a meaning that could change the life of an entire city. Keanu Reeves, who became the agent of this change, continued his journey with an unshakable belief that even the deepest wounds can heal if you give the light a chance to penetrate the heart of each person. His path was not easy, but he knew that only by going through trials and overcoming his own doubts can one achieve true unity that can overcome any obstacles. Soon after the historical events described in the previous chapters, Riverside found itself on the threshold of new changes, not only in public opinion, but also in the souls of its residents. Keanu Reeves, who left a mark on the hearts of local people, continued his path, filled with a sincere desire to restore justice and peace in this small but amazing corner of Arizona. However, as often happens, change does not come easily. It requires sacrifice, determination, and the ability to resist not only external threats, but also one's own shadows of the past. Deep in thought against the backdrop of the starry sky, Keanu recalled his childhood. Before the broken dreams and crumbling buildings, images of his hometown emerged in his mind, where children played in the sun-drenched streets and adults gathered to share joy and sorrow. These memories became a source of strength for him, a reminder that true life and love can conquer even the darkest moments. Now, faced with the cold reality of modern times, he understood that the path to urban renewal began with internal reconciliation, with the ability to forgive oneself for past mistakes and take responsibility for the future. The day after Change Day, the air was filled with a sense of freshness and hope. The early morning greeted the city with a soft glow, and the streets were filled with the sounds of a city awakening. Like an artist trying to recreate a forgotten palette of colors, Keanu began his walk through familiar places in Riverside, paying attention to every little sign of change. He stopped at old shops where owners were already remodeling their interiors to symbolize a new beginning, and at abandoned houses that, thanks to the efforts of local volunteers, were beginning to find a second life. Among the many people he met along the way, a young man named Travis, who had once been a member of the Steel Crows gang, stood out. His life changed after he felt guilty for his actions and decided to radically change the direction of his destiny. Now Travis became an assistant to local public organizations, participated in charity projects, and sincerely believed that correcting mistakes is possible only through awareness and sincere repentance. He was the first to dare to go out into the streets, calling on his former comrades in arms to abandon old habits and start a new life based on the principles of honesty and mutual respect. Keanu and Travis met on a busy street where a new life was beginning to form. The young man, with awe in his eyes, spoke of his struggles and redemption, of how he fought the demons of his past every day, trying to keep them from eclipsing the light of his future. His words were full of pain and hope, and even in this brief conversation, Keanu saw a reflection of his own internal conflict. The struggle between a past that left deep scars and a desire for redemption that allowed him to look to the future with confidence and light. As the city continued to wake up, there was a growing energy of change that could not be contained. Encounters on the streets, dialogues in cafes, and informal conversations in small shopping areas became real acts of protest against the evil that once lived in the shadows of Riverside. Every resident, be it an elderly sage or a young activist, realized that change is a collective effort in which even the smallest contribution can be decisive. Keanu, becoming an increasingly visible figure in these changes, increasingly found himself in the spotlight when his words inspired people to fight for a better future. There were also new conflicts. The shadows of the past, left in the hearts of those who had failed to overcome their own fears and grievances, began to awaken again. Several old members of the gang, unwilling to accept the loss of power and influence, secretly made plans to revive the old order. They gathered in abandoned warehouses where the walls, covered with a layer of dust and oblivion, became witnesses not only to gloomy conversations, but also to determined intentions to restore the former greatness through violence and intimidation. These people could not accept the new reality, a reality where change had become an integral part of life, where every voice, every step, every word had a meaning capable of awakening the deepest strings of the human heart. One day, when the darkness of night enveloped Riverside, a meeting took place in one of the old abandoned buildings, which was later talked about in all corners of the city. In a semi-dark room, where only a soft rustle of the wind could be heard, conducting its silent conversation with the walls, a small group of old opponents of change gathered. Their faces, exhausted and full of determination, reflected an internal struggle, the desire to regain control and the fear of a new, bright future. It was at this moment that Travis, realizing the importance of change, decided to take a step that could change his life forever. Without hesitation, he approached the leader of the group and spoke in a quiet but firm voice. "We have all been through the darkest times. It is time to let go of the past and give a chance for light to enter our hearts." His words sounded like a spark that can ignite the flame of hope even in the coldest souls. However, old grievances and a deep aversion to change made it difficult to accept his message unambiguously, and a tense silence hung in the air, a harbinger of future conflict. The next day, as the first rays of sunlight once again illuminated the city, Keanu received information that tensions in some corners of Riverside had reached a critical point. Residents began to notice strange shadows, people dressed in dark jackets that hid their faces, walking along the streets as if under cover of night, and their eyes were full of hatred and determination. These sightings caused alarm among community leaders, who understood that if nothing was done, Old passions could flare up again and destroy the fragile peace they had worked so hard to build. Keanu, realizing the gravity of the situation, decided to act decisively. He called for a personal meeting with local government officials, community leaders, and even former gang members who had already chosen the path of change. In the small hall of the old city council, where the fate of Riverside was once decided, he spoke to the crowd, reminding them that change begins with small things, with each of us, with every sincere minute spent in the name of justice. His words were imbued not only with wisdom and experience, but also with the pain of past losses, which made his voice especially weighty and significant. "We cannot allow fear and hatred to take over our hearts again," he said, and his speech, filled with determination and passion, echoed around the room, touching even the coldest souls. During this meeting, it was decided to create a working group that would not only prevent new conflicts, but also actively promote ideas of unity and mutual understanding. Calling it New Dawn, the participants hoped that the initiative would become a bridge between the past and the future, uniting people who, although different, had a common desire to live in peace and harmony. The group's work began immediately. Roundtables were held, events were organized for all residents, where not only problems were discussed, but also ways to solve them. Each of those present felt that now, when the voice of reason and justice sounds loudly and confidently, they have a chance to change their lives and the life of the city. Over the next few weeks, Riverside saw significant changes. Old buildings were gradually adorned with colorful graffiti calling for unity and peace, and the streets were filled with new symbols of hope. Every corner of the city was filled with signs of attention to the past, old photographs, stories of great changes, quotes from great thinkers, all of which served as a reminder that even in the most difficult times, one can find the strength to revive. Keanu tirelessly visited different neighborhoods, talked to residents, listened to their stories, and sought to find a compromise between old traditions and new trends. His approach, based on sincere dialogue and respect for everyone, became an example of how even the most insurmountable barriers can be overcome. Meanwhile, the shadows of the past were still trying to regain their positions. The group that had gathered on that ominous evening had not disappeared completely. Their actions left traces behind them, which with each passing day became increasingly clear reminders that change always meets resistance. In the alleys at night, one could hear quiet conversations, and sometimes even the sound of quick footsteps, as if someone was hurrying to warn of impending danger. These moments of anxiety forced the city's inhabitants to listen carefully to the voice of reason and not to forget that peace is not a gift, but a difficult and stubborn path that requires constant vigilance. However, despite the difficulties that arose, New Dawn continued to gain momentum. Each new day brought more and more signs that people were ready to leave old grievances behind and move towards a brighter future. Keanu Reeves, who became a symbol of this change, showed by his example that true strength lies not in brute force, but in the ability to forgive, understand, and unite. His words about the enormous potential for good hidden in every person became a beacon for those who were looking for a way out of the labyrinth of darkness. He believed that if you join forces, even the deepest wounds can be healed, and mental barriers can be destroyed forever. And so, at this pivotal moment in Riverside history, when the past and the future were in constant conflict, Keanu Reeves continued on his way, full of determination and faith. His life, intertwined with the lives of so many, became a shining example of how one person can become an engine of change, capable of not only healing the wounds of society, but also lighting a spark that will ignite into a flame of hope for all. Every step, every word, even his silence, spoke of the fact that the present is a time for courageous actions, for generosity, and a true understanding that the light, no matter how dimly it flickers in the darkness, will always find its way into our hearts. Several weeks had passed since the New Dawn confidently entered the streets of Riverside, and the city seemed to be absorbing fresh energy of change. But like any significant transformation, it could not do without its own challenges and new threats. Keanu Reeves continued his path as a leader, gaining more and more popularity among the city's residents. His name became a symbol of hope and change, but at the same time attracted the attention of those who were not ready to accept the loss of their former power and familiar order. As early autumn approached, the hot sun gave way to cooler, gentler winds, and Riverside found itself on the brink of another storm. The sense of change that filled the air was as fresh as it was unsettling, a latent threat that could erupt at any moment. In these twilight days, when the city streets seemed shrouded in a fog of uncertainty, Keanu began to notice strange signs of things to come. One such day, as Keanu walked down the main street, He felt a gaze on him, full of hidden hostility and determination. It was one of the old gang, a group that, despite the efforts of the new dawn, had not been able to completely abandon their old ways. A man, tall and muscular, with a face covered in scars from past battles, stepped out of the shadows and fixed his gaze. His gaze was icy, as if he embodied all the cruelty that Riverside had once known. This dark character, known as Wild Tom, was a legend among those who continued to honor the old laws of the streets, and his appearance meant that the opponents of change had decided to strike back. Keanu was not afraid, his face calm, as if he had long been accustomed to meeting those who opposed the new order. He nodded a reserved greeting, but his eyes remained alert, taking in every detail. Soon after this meeting, rumors of Wild Tom organizing secret meetings of disgruntled old bikers began to spread around the city. The rumors buzzed like harbingers of an approaching storm, and no one could say exactly when all the hidden discontents would burst into a bright flame of violence. Meanwhile, New Dawn continued its work. Keanu, together with city officials, local activists, and even former members of old gangs, held endless meetings aimed at bringing together people who were ready for dialogue and cooperation. They discussed plans to redevelop abandoned neighborhoods, restore cultural centers, and create new public spaces where everyone could find support and hear the voice of their hearts. Words of encouragement were heard in the halls of local community centers, and slogans appeared on stands. For peace and unity, New Riverside is our common home. Time for change. These calls found a response from those who sincerely believe that even in the most difficult conditions, it is possible to find a ray of light. However, not everyone shared this belief. In dark alleys and abandoned warehouses, those who did not want to accept the changes gathered. Wild Tom and his comrades held secret meetings where they discussed how to return to their former strength and power. They planned provocative actions that could destabilize the city and return everyone to a life of fear and violence. In their eyes, change was a threat to the usual order, and the world created by the efforts of New Dawn was perceived as a deception that deprived them of their true power. Every step they took, every word they said was imbued with the determination to return power to the streets, even if it meant resorting to extreme measures. One of these measures was the decision to organize a series of provocative clashes at key points in Riverside. At night, when the city fell into a deep sleep, secret meetings took place in dark alleys, accompanied by muffled conversations and rustling footsteps. These nocturnal events remained in the shadows, but rumors about them quickly spread, causing fear among residents. Keanu did not remain indifferent to this threat. He understood that as long as Wild Tom and his followers continued to operate underground, the world they had worked so hard to build could be at risk. He began to gather his like-minded people to prepare for a possible conflict that could develop into a real civil schism. Over the next few days, tensions mounted. Meetings in community halls turned into heated debates about safety measures and ways to counter the violence. Keanu acted not only as a leader, but also as a mediator, able to reconcile disparate views. His speeches were full of determination and sincerity. The strength of the people lies in their unity, and any attempt to divide them would be doomed to failure. We cannot allow fear and hatred to take hold of our hearts again, he repeated, like a spell to drive away the darkness. One evening, when the dawn was just beginning to give way to the cool of the night, Keanu and a group of trusted people headed to an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city. This warehouse had long been a symbol of the old times, a place where those who had rejected the new path and preferred to live according to the laws of the past gathered. Under cover of night, in the darkness full of rustling and distant sounds, Keanu's group held a meeting there with representatives of different strata of society, young activists, old-timers, and even former opponents of change who decided that further existence without dialogue was impossible. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone present understood that at this moment the fate of not only Riverside, but also the spirit of change itself was being decided. During the meeting, different scenarios were discussed. Some called for tough counteraction to provocations, others for nonviolent resistance and dialogue. Keanu advocated the second path. He believed that even if the enemy is strong, violence cannot be the answer to violence. We must show that true strength lies in the ability to listen to each other, in the ability to understand and accept, he said, and his words found a response in the hearts of those present. He told stories about great leaders of the past, about people who, despite all the obstacles, were able to change the world with their faith and determination. Each story was filled with meaning. Each emotion was charged with sincerity and love for their city. But while words of wisdom and hope were being spoken in the hall, somewhere outside, in the stillness of the night, while Tom and his cronies were plotting their own plan. Their goal was to create chaos that would undermine the efforts of New Dawn. They were preparing tactical maneuvers, counting on unexpected confrontations and provocations that would cause panic among the citizens and destroy the peace they had worked so hard to build. Their approach was brutal and ruthless, and they would stop at nothing to retake control of the streets of Riverside. Keanu understood that the coming storm was not just a conflict between old and new forces, but a test for the entire community. He knew that if the residents did not unite, if they were not ready to defend their choice of peace and justice, then their city would once again plunge into the darkness of violence and fear. That is why he began to actively work on creating a system of mutual aid. Observation groups were organized, contacts were established with the local police, and even specialists from neighboring cities were brought in to ensure a prompt response to any provocation. Every resident of Riverside was called upon to contribute to the common cause, to become part of a large mechanism that could withstand any threat. Over the next few days, the situation grew tense. The city streets, previously filled with optimism and hope, gradually began to feel tense. People were anxiously talking to each other on the streets, discussing the latest rumors and observations. Outbursts of anger were heard somewhere. Silhouettes were flashing in dark alleys somewhere. Every sound, every rustle made hearts beat faster. Keanu did not allow himself to relax. He personally monitored the situation, conducted night patrols, met with district leaders, and maintained contact with initiative groups to be sure that no provocation would go unnoticed. One of those gloomy evenings, when the rain began to drizzle, as if trying to wash away the remnants of old grievances, Keanu received an alarming message. The information indicated that a mass action against the New Dawn was planned in the city center. This news immediately raised a wave of anxiety among the inhabitants, and information began to spread everywhere that the time of testing had come. Keanu called an urgent meeting with representatives of all active groups, and the atmosphere in the room was electric. Everyone understood that not only the fate of the city was at stake, but also the future of all who dreamed of peace and unity. The meeting discussed concrete steps to prevent violence. Evacuation plans were drawn up. So-called safe zones were set up where residents could take refuge if the situation worsened, and direct lines of communication with emergency services were established. Keanu, with his calm but determined manner, became a central figure in this process. He personally spoke about the importance of keeping a cool head and not giving in to panic, and the importance of believing in the power of unity and kindness. His words, filled with confidence and sincerity, became the anchor that kept the general mood for a positive solution to the crisis. Amid all this tension, the city was experiencing its own moment of truth. People who had been divided by fear and hatred began to band together in small communities to face the coming storm. A new energy was felt in every corner of Riverside, an energy that was born from a belief in a brighter future, even when the darkness seemed impenetrable. Keanu Reeves, a beacon of hope, continued to lead the people, reminding them that every hardship was just a step toward true unity, that even in the darkest hours it was possible to find the strength to overcome all obstacles. So in Riverside, on the brink of an autumn storm, the fate of the town hung in the balance between old and new, between violence and peace. Keanu Reeves stood firm at this crossroads, ready to defend what had been so painstakingly built and to fight back against those who sought to return the town to lawless darkness. His determination, his belief in the power of unity, and the unquenchable fire in his heart became a symbol of how change can overcome even the most violent forces when people come together for the common good. Under the cover of dark, storm clouds that hung over Riverside, there came a moment when the tension that had been building for years came to a head. That evening, as the first flashes of lightning cut through the heavy sky, the city found itself on the brink of chaos. Keanu Reeves, driven by an unwavering determination to protect the peace, knew that every moment of tension brought the moment closer when old forces would try to reassert their rule. This was to be a turning point, a night when Riverside would confront its own fears, prejudices, and what remained of its destructive past. As the ominous evening darkness fell that day, the city streets seemed to take on a new breath. Echoes of conversations could be heard above the roar of the approaching storm, as people discussed the latest rumors and premonitions. Extra security measures were put in place in the central square, where debates and meetings had recently been taking place, and locals, dressed in warm jackets and scarves, hurried to take shelter from possible violence. But there was more than just anxiety in the air, a sense that the changes that had been building slowly and steadily for so long were about to come crashing down in an unpredictable rush. Keanu, illuminated by the soft light of the street lamps and the reflection of raindrops on the wet asphalt, walked slowly along the main street of the city. His steps were heavy, and his gaze was focused. He felt how each of his movements was filled with meaning and responsibility. The fate of Riverside was in his hands, a fate that could not be betrayed. His hands, trembling from the cold, tightly clutched the leather bag in which he carried all the documents, plans, and notes prepared as part of the New Dawn initiative. These papers became a symbol of the struggle for the future, for the right to live without fear, for the revival of a city that once flourished with the spirit of community and mutual assistance. At the same moment as Keanu crossed the central square, he noticed a strange movement near the Old City Museum, a building that had long served as a keeper of the memory of bygone eras. From somewhere around the corner came several people, dressed in dark, as if deliberately merging with the night shadows. Their faces betrayed no emotion, and their eyes shone with cold calculation. It was a group associated with Wild Tom, who seemed to have decided that the time for change had come for a decisive but destructive step. They moved purposefully, as if they knew exactly where they needed to go, and their silent agreement indicated that the collapse of the current order was inevitable. A few minutes later, as the loudspeaker installed in the square began broadcasting the message of upcoming checks and increased patrols, a sharp, piercing sound of sirens was heard right outside the museum building. These were the first signs of the approaching confrontation, which foreshadowed a large-scale conflict. Keanu, realizing that things would take a different, more violent turn, slowed down, carefully observing what was happening. At that moment, he felt the pulse of the city, how its heart was beating, how the true essence of the human soul was ready to come out, both that it is capable of miracles and that it can be ruthless. At the same moment when lightning began to light up the night sky, a group of opponents of the New Dawn made an unexpected move. They approached a small cafe known locally as the Coffee Shop, where for many years both supporters of change and those petrified by new ideas had gathered. Inside the cafe, lit by dim lamps, several people clearly opposed to the initiative were already preparing for provocation. Their faces reflected determination and fury, and their voices raised to a shout predicted that the old order must be restored at any cost. Keanu walked into the cafe without losing his composure, where the atmosphere was tense to the limit. Instantly, the room fell silent, as if the atmosphere itself was waiting for his words. He stood up and, looking around, began to speak in a voice full of confidence and determination. "We will not allow fear and violence to determine the future of our city. This evening is not a time for revenge, but a time for unity. Together, we can overcome any storm, and only unity can stop the destruction of our home." His words echoed throughout the room, causing a storm of emotion and hope even among those who still doubted. However, not everyone in the cafe was in the mood for a peaceful dialogue. In the corner of the room, at an old wooden table, sat people whose gazes were full of determination and hidden aggression. One of them, a man with an icy expression and deep scars on his cheek, stood up and answered with a sly grin. "You, Keanu, dream of peace, but you do not understand that peace is only an illusion. True power lies in regaining control of the streets. Today, we will show that the old order is still alive." His voice, imbued with cold determination, caused indignation among some of those present, but also alarm among those who hoped for change. From that moment on, a tense discussion began in the cafe, which quickly escalated into an open conflict. Some called for dialogue and a peaceful solution, while others were unwilling to give in and were ready to defend their vision of the future to the last drop of blood. Agitated voices, interrupted by the sounds of rain outside the windows, created an atmosphere as if nature itself had responded to the call of battle. Keanu, remaining the center of attention, tried to calm the passions, but his efforts were not strong enough to stop the raging storm. At that moment, the sound of breaking glass was heard in the cafe, and several people, dissatisfied with the words of the leader of change, rushed outside, declaring that they did not intend to tolerate any attempts by the new ideologists to destroy their usual way of life. A real epic began on the streets of Riverside. In the dark alleys, lit only by the flickering light of street lamps, clashes between groups of supporters of the old order and activists of the New Dawn became inevitable. People who were once united by the desire to live in peace now found themselves facing a cruel reality, when every step could be the last, when every look could become a spark that could ignite a fire of hatred. Keanu, true to his principles, immediately organized rapid response teams. He coordinated actions with the local police, mobilized volunteers, and personally walked the streets to make sure that no citizen was left alone in danger. The fighting that took place over the next few hours turned Riverside into an arena where the fate of the city hung in the balance. In the pouring rain, in the midst of conflict, every drop seemed like a symbol of purification, every siren a sign that change was inevitable, even if it came with pain and loss. Keanu continued his rounds, his face expressing not only determination but also deep sorrow for those caught up in the violence. He saw how old grievances and new divisions tore people apart, how the ideals they had fought so hard for gradually dissolved in the turmoil and chaos. At one crucial moment, when the conflict was reaching its climax, Keanu managed to gather representatives of both camps together in the main square. Under the sound of rain and the flickering of lightning, he gave a speech that was to become a turning point in this storm. "We stand on the threshold of a new era," he said, "and each of us is responsible for the future of our city. Let this night be a lesson to us all. No old grievances can prevent us from finding unity. No provocation can destroy our faith and goodness. We are a people capable of generosity and wisdom. Let us together build a riverside where peace and understanding reign, where violence gives way to dialogue, and fear gives way to hope." His words, filled with sincerity and desperate faith, echoed through the icy streets, forcing even the most adamant to think about the fact that true strength lies not in destruction, but in creation. Soon after this speech, the atmosphere began to change. People, shocked by the loud words and the realization that the war between the past and the future was threatening to destroy their homes, began to retreat, thinking about what had been said. Representatives of both sides, tired of the senseless violence, promised themselves to try to find a compromise. Despite the deep wounds inflicted by the conflict, a spark of hope began to emerge in the hearts of people that change was possible if they united their efforts to restore peace and justice. The rain gradually washed away the last of the blood and dirt from the streets of Riverside, leaving behind a freshness and purity as if nature itself wanted to start all over again. Keanu Reeves, watching the streetlights come back on and people cautiously emerge from their shelters to exchange greetings, realized that even in the darkest hours, rebirth is possible. This moment became the starting point for a new era, when all those who had witnessed the devastating consequences of old grievances decided to join forces to build a future of unity, understanding, and peace. Over the next few hours, the tension gradually gave way to meaningful conversations and careful dialogue. In the main square, where only recently there were voices of disagreement, people began to discuss plans for rebuilding the city, for greening the streets, for organizing joint celebrations and events aimed at uniting disparate communities. And although many wounds required a long time to heal, it was already felt that the strength of spirit and faith in the best can overcome even the most terrible trials. Thus ended a night of devastating clashes, and a new chapter in the life of Riverside began, a chapter where every step forward was shrouded in the bitterness of loss, but also sincere hope for a brighter future. Keanu Reeves, despite the trials he had endured, remained a symbol of courage, wisdom, and faith in change. His words and actions became a lesson for everyone. Even in the darkest times, you can find the strength to forgive, restore, and begin again. And looking to the future, people understood that change is not the end, but only the beginning of a path along which each of them can find their share of light and joy. Thus, to the sounds of a dying storm, as the city slowly began to return to normal life, Riverside closed one of its most turbulent chapters. But history, like life, does not stop at one moment. There are still many roads ahead, many trials, and, most importantly, many opportunities for those who are ready to fight for peace, justice, and unity. And Keanu Reeves, continuing on his way, knew that it is in this desire for a brighter future that lies the real power, capable of overcoming any barriers and destroying the walls that divide people's hearts. Months had passed since the violent night that changed the face of Riverside forever. In a city once ruled by fear and division, a new order was slowly emerging, one bathed in the light of hope and unity. Keanu Reeves, whose name had become synonymous with change, continued his journey, working tirelessly to heal the wounds of the past and lay a solid foundation for a prosperous future. As the echoes of the night's violence slowly faded, the city was finding a new soul, where each morning began with the promise of renewal and each sunset with faith in the future. From the first days of the new phase in Riverside's history, it was clear that the efforts of New Dawn had borne fruit. It was no coincidence that new symbols of unity appeared in the central square. Colorful mosaics created by the joint hands of local artists decorated the walls of old buildings. And trees planted in the streets reminded that even in the harshest conditions, there is a place to live and grow. Keanu, together with a group of volunteers, organized several charity events aimed at supporting the disadvantaged, and initiated the construction of a new cultural center, which was to become a place for meetings, dialogue, and creative expression. One of the landmark events was the opening of the Home Arena, a multifunctional space where everyone could express themselves, from art exhibitions and music concerts to lectures on civic responsibility and public debates. This place, filled with creative energy and life, became the heart of the reviving Riverside. Here, people of all ages and social status could share their stories, find support, and make plans for a future free of fear and hatred. Keanu often visited this arena, where his warm, sincere look and words of inspiration made even the most skeptical think about the fact that change is not a dream, but a reality available to everyone. Despite all efforts, the road to unity was not an easy one. Remnants of old grievances and prejudices continued to haunt the city like shadows that refused to disappear. Some of the former supporters of the old order, having renounced violence, tried to find their place in the new society, facing internal conflict and seeking reconciliation with the past. Keanu understood that true healing is possible only when each person accepts their share of responsibility for the mistakes of the past and begins to look to the future with an open heart. He organized roundtables, meetings with psychologists, and conflict management trainings to help people learn to live in peace and mutual understanding. The belief that even the deepest wounds can heal if given a chance for sincere dialogue and support shone in his eyes. At the same time, changes were taking place in the town at the level of urban infrastructure. Local authorities, inspired by the example of public initiatives, began to invest in the renewal of public spaces, repair of old roads, and creation of new parks. The economic situation gradually improved, new enterprises opened, and people began to believe that their town could again become a thriving center of cultural and economic activity. Keanu noted more than once that it was the spirit of unity, uniting residents in the pursuit of the best, that became the main driver of these changes. His speeches at meetings, filled with sincerity and optimism, inspired even those who had previously been skeptical about any change. Meanwhile, Keanu's personal life was also undergoing changes. After experiencing conflicts and turbulent events, he began to find time to stop and reflect on his life's journey. Meetings with friends, long walks along newly decorated streets, and quiet evenings spent in the company of loved ones helped him find inner balance. He realized that leadership is not only a struggle with external challenges, but also constant work on yourself, the ability to forgive and move forward. His relationships with former opponents, who gradually accepted the new reality, became an example of how the past can become a lesson, not a burden. Meeting people who had their own stories and fears, Keanu learned to listen, support, and guide, turning each meeting into a step towards common well-being. One day, during a public forum about the history of change in Riverside, one of the participants, an elderly man with deep lines on his face, stood up and said, "I remember how we lived in fear, how our city was divided into us and them. But now, looking at you, I believe that we can live together as one big family. Thank you for giving us a chance at a new life." These words, filled with gratitude and recognition, made many in the room reflect on how each of us can be agents of change if we are not afraid to show our humanity. The new initiative spread beyond Riverside. Neighboring communities, having seen how the city managed to overcome its internal divisions, began to adopt the experience of New Dawn. Regional media covered the processes taking place in the city with interest, telling stories about how love and unity can overcome any obstacles. Keanu, receiving letters and messages from people in other cities, felt that his efforts were not in vain, that his example was inspiring those who dreamed of peace and harmony. However, not all problems were solved completely. There were those who slowly tried to return to the old methods, who could not come to terms with the new reality. From time to time, individuals remained in the shadows, ready for provocation and conflict, but their influence was gradually diminished by the onslaught of the collective force of the new society. Keanu and his team continued their work, knowing that only constant attention to the needs of society and open dialogue could guarantee the sustainability of change. He continued to meet with representatives of all strata of the population, listen to their problems, and seek ways to constructively resolve conflicts. Thus, in this turning point, when a new world was being born on the ruins of old ideas, Riverside began to truly come to life. The city, which had once been a place of despair and violence, was becoming a symbol of rebirth, proof that even after the most difficult trials, one can find the strength for renewal. Keanu Reeves, who stood at the head of this movement, continued to inspire residents with his example, his unwavering desire for peace and justice. His path was long and thorny, but each new day brought confidence that the light of hope can pierce even the darkest clouds of the past. The streets of Riverside were filled with joyful voices, children laughing, and conversations over cups of aromatic coffee in newly opened cafes. In every corner of the city, you could feel the breath of a new beginning, when every drop of rain washed away the remnants of bitterness and left behind freshness and a desire to live. Keanu knew that there was still a lot of work ahead, a lot of challenges, but now he felt that together with the people of the city, they were able to overcome any difficulties. After all, it was in unity that there was a power that could lift even the most disadvantaged souls and give them a chance for a brighter future. And so the story of Riverside continued, a story of how love, understanding, and sharing can turn pain into hope, and dark times into a new era where each person can contribute to the common good. Keanu Reeves, standing at the threshold of this new era, looked to the future with confidence, knowing that every change begins with a small step, and every hope can flare into a fire that can light the way for millions. And in this understanding lay the essence of true leadership, not in suppressing enemies, but in uniting hearts yearning for peace, justice, and prosperity for all. As time passed, Riverside, once torn apart by conflict and violence, gradually transformed into a city where voices of hope were heard on every corner and confidence in the future was reflected in the eyes of the residents. Keanu Reeves, who left a deep mark on the history of this place, continued his path, turning from a leader into a symbol of change, an example for new generations striving for peace, justice, and unity. His life became a testimony to the fact that even the most difficult trials can give birth to forces capable of transforming an entire city. In those days, when the city was already breathing in the atmosphere of renewed unity, Keanu often wandered its bustling streets, stopping for a moment to look at the faces of the locals, who were a reflection of the changes. He saw how the central square, where chaos once reigned, was now hosting cultural festivals, master classes, and creative meetings. The streets, once dusty and full of the pain of the past, were now illuminated by the neon signs of new cafes and bookstores, and every corner of the city was breathing life and creativity. In the years since the tumultuous events of the previous night, when the streets were filled with cries and sounds of clashes, Riverside has become an example of how pain can be turned into strength and disagreement into an opportunity for dialogue. The New Dawn Initiative, founded on the ideas of mutual understanding and support, has become more than just a project, but a real movement uniting people of different ages, views, and life stories. Keanu knew that change does not happen overnight, but it is consistency and perseverance in striving for the better that make real transformation possible in society. He personally attended meetings, participated in public discussions, and, despite his age, continued to inspire those who were just beginning their journey in the fight for justice. On one of those evenings, when the soft light of the street lamps was reflected in the shiny windows of the renovated buildings, Keanu decided to hold a meeting with the youth, those who from an early age had absorbed the ideals of peace and unity born in Riverside. Young people, dressed in stylish jeans and t-shirts with prints symbolizing a new beginning, listened with interest to Keanu's stories about the past, about the difficult path from disunity to unity. He spoke about how important it is to remember the lessons of history in order not to repeat mistakes, and how every new idea, every action can become a brick in the foundation of a better future. His voice, imbued with wisdom and warmth, inspired the listeners, making them believe that light always conquers darkness. New symbols of change appeared on the city streets. Instead of graffiti painted in bright colors, the walls were now decorated with murals telling stories of unity, solidarity, and love. In each drawing, whether it was an image of people hugging or scenes of joint work, one could see a reflection of the efforts that people made to create a new world. These works of art became not only an adornment of the city, but also a reminder that change begins with small steps, with faith in the possibility of good even in the most seemingly hopeless situations. Keanu did not forget about those who were still searching for their place in the new society. He visited old neighborhoods where people accustomed to the usual order did not yet dare to open up to new ideas. In these quiet corners, filled with echoes of the past, he held individual conversations, sharing his experience and helping everyone find the strength for change. He understood that the path to unity was long and difficult, but he believed that sincere desire and readiness for dialogue can overcome any barriers. His words, spoken in a quiet but firm voice, found a response even in the hearts of the most skeptical residents. As time went on, more and more events in Riverside began to be devoted not only to cultural events, but also to educational programs aimed at overcoming intergenerational and intercultural differences. In the school, where studies were previously limited to dry history lessons, interactive classes were now held, in which students, together with teachers, studied examples of successful changes in the world, discussed the importance of friendship, mutual understanding, and responsibility. Young people enthusiastically participated in such projects, realizing that they could become the bearers of a new spirit capable of changing not only the city, but the entire country. One day, at the opening of a new cultural heritage center that was built on the site of an old abandoned building, Keanu spoke to a large audience. He talked about how even when it seems like the world is falling apart, there is always an opportunity to pick up the pieces and create something beautiful. His speech was filled with memories of difficult times when the streets of Riverside were covered in the shadows of discord, but also of those moments when the unity of people allowed them to overcome all obstacles. The audience took in his every word with bated breath, understanding that behind each story there is not only a personal tragedy, but also an endless potential for revival. This meeting became a turning point in the life of the city. People inspired by Keanu's speech began to actively participate in the life of Riverside, offered their ideas, organized new projects, striving to contribute to the common cause. The city authorities, seeing that the efforts of citizens were bearing fruit, began to support initiatives aimed at developing public infrastructure even more actively. New parks, public spaces, as well as a center for trainings and seminars were created, where one could learn not only the art of compromise, but also the skills of dialogue, which are so necessary for living in a multifaceted society. But along with optimism and bright hopes came new challenges. The world is changing, and despite all the successes, there was always room for doubt, for those who could not or did not want to believe in the power of change. Some residents, not used to letting go of past grievances, quietly watched the developments, wondering, what will happen next? Keanu Reeves understood that in any system of change, new problems can arise, and that even if today is a period of peace and unity, tomorrow may bring new challenges. He knew that true strength lies not only in overcoming difficulties, but also in the ability to constantly guard your values, in the constant desire to improve and maintain a fragile peace. In this context, Keanu decided it was time to share his knowledge and experience with those just starting out in the field of social work. He founded an educational program called Path of Light, where young leaders could learn methods of nonviolent resistance, the art of diplomacy, and conflict management. The program quickly gained popularity not only in Riverside, but also in other cities, becoming a real catalyst for change in many regions. Path of Light graduates continued to spread the ideals of peace, working in a variety of fields, from social work to politics and business. Each of them was living proof that change is possible if you light a spark of love and mutual understanding in every heart. Over the years, Keanu Reeves became wiser, his view of the world acquired new facets, and he realized that his mission did not end in one city or even one country. His example inspired people around the world, making them believe that even in the darkest corners of the human soul, there is a place for light and goodness. At annual international conferences dedicated to peace and unity, he was invited to speak as an honorary lecturer, and every word he said echoed in the hearts of the audience. His life became a true legend, and the name of Keanu Reeves became a symbol of the struggle for truth and justice, a symbol of the fact that even one person is capable of changing the fate of the entire world. So, looking back on the path they had traveled, the people of Riverside remembered with gratitude the times when fear and hatred threatened to destroy their hometown. They knew that change was an endless process that required constant work, support, and mutual assistance. But now their hearts were filled with faith in the best, and the city streets were filled with the sounds of laughter, music, and lively conversations. Each new dawn brought hope, and each sunset was a reminder that even the most difficult trials can give way to love and unity. The epilogue of this story did not end on the pages of past years. It was the beginning of a new era, where the legacy of light was passed on from generation to generation, where each new leader, each new idea became a continuation of the great saga of how people are able to transform the world if they are not afraid to dream and act. Keanu Reeves, remaining in the hearts of people, continued to watch how his city and its inhabitants grew, how they learned to be together, respecting differences and supporting each other in the pursuit of the common good. And though time moved inexorably forward, leaving behind the pages of history, the spirit of Riverside and its legacy remained unshakable. It was a story of how love, faith, and perseverance can change even the darkest corner of the world, how even a single spark can ignite a flame that warms hearts and unites nations. At the crossroads of destinies and on the border between the past and the future, in every look and every gesture, the endless song of life continued, reminding everyone that the path to light begins with a small step, and that true legacy lies in passing on this faith, carrying it through generations. Thus ended the saga, leaving behind not only the story of Riverside, but also a living message to all who strive for peace and justice. Never give up, even when the darkness seems impenetrable, for the true strength of a person is measured by his ability to love, forgive, and build a new world where every voice matters and every dream has a chance to become reality.